The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as Malcolm Rees stood at the defendant's table alone. His suit, though clean, was slightly worn. Across from him, Bryce Lambert, the bank's top attorney, leaned back confidently, while Judge Ethan Crawley chuckled from the bench. "Representing yourself, Mr. Rees," the judge mocked, tapping his gavel lightly. "This should be entertaining." But Malcolm didn't flinch. He met the judge's gaze and said calmly, "I'm not here to entertain, Your Honor. I'm here to win." Could a man without a law degree really expose corruption in open court? Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from. If you stand for justice, hit like and subscribe to hear more stories like this. 6 months earlier, Malcolm Rees stood on the cracked front porch of his mother's house, the morning sun casting long shadows over the weathered steps. The house, modest but filled with memories, had been in his family for 3 generations. It was more than property. It was history, the last tangible piece of his late mother's legacy. But today, clutched in his hand, was an eviction notice stamped in bold red ink. Final notice. Property to be vacated in 14 days. Malcolm blinked, his throat tightening as he reread the words. His mother, Ella Rees, had worked 2 jobs to keep this house. She died believing it was secure, paid off, free and clear. How could this be happening? Heart pounding, he rushed inside, flipping through the file cabinet in the corner of the living room. Mortgage statements, tax receipts. The original deed, everything was in order, except for one thing. A document he'd never seen before labeled Second Mortgage Agreement, bearing what appeared to be his mother's signature. But something about the handwriting was off, shakier than her usual script, the letters slanting. At an unfamiliar angle, Malcolm's first call was to the bank. He sat on hold for nearly 30 minutes, his knee bouncing impatiently, until a clipped, disinterested voice answered. "Foreclosure Department, First Union Bank. I'm calling about an eviction notice for Ella Rees's property," Malcolm said, gripping the phone tighter. "There's been a mistake. The mortgage was paid off. I have the deed." The woman on the other end sighed. "Sir, the account is in default due to non-payment on a second mortgage taken out 2 years ago. Foreclosure proceedings are final." Malcolm frowned. "That's impossible. My mother never took out a second mortgage." "I'm looking at her signed agreement right here, Mr. Rees. Maybe you weren't aware of her financial situation." The insinuation hit like a slap. Malcolm gritted his teeth. "I want copies of every document related to this loan. File a request with our legal department," the woman replied coolly. "But it won't stop the eviction." The line went dead. Still gripping the phone, Malcolm stared at the framed photo of his mother on the mantel, taken the day she'd finally burned the original mortgage paperwork, celebrating freedom from debt. His jaw tightened. Someone was lying. Determined to fight, Malcolm drove straight to the bank, where he was met by Darren Klein, the branch manager. Klein, a middle-aged white man with a smug smile, barely glanced at Malcolm's paperwork before shaking his head. "People like you need to learn the system's not made for you," Klein said, sliding the documents back across the desk. "Here, if you're in default, you lose the house. End of story." Malcolm leaned forward, his voice low and controlled. "This signature on the second mortgage, it's not my mother's. Look closely." Klein's eyes flicked to the page, but his smirk never wavered. "Signatures change over time. People get desperate, make bad decisions. Maybe she didn't tell you." "She didn't take out this loan," Malcolm insisted. "And you know it." Klein's expression hardened. "If you want to fight it, hire a lawyer, but you'd better act fast. You've got 2 weeks. Malcolm left the bank boiling with anger. Lawyers weren't an option. He couldn't afford one. After losing his social work job during corporate downsizing, he'd been working part-time as a janitor at the local community center. Every paycheck went toward bills, food, and keeping the lights on. There was no room for legal fees. That night, he sat at the kitchen table, papers spread out in front of him, eyes burning from hours of reading fine print. His phone buzzed, a text from his girlfriend, Nia. "How bad is it?" "Bad," he typed back. "But I'm not giving up." The next morning, he visited the local legal aid office, but the receptionist barely glanced at his paperwork before shaking her head. "We're at capacity. Try private counsel." He did. Firm after firm turned him down, citing conflict of interest, workload, or more bluntly, "We don't take cases we can't win." Frustration mounting, Malcolm returned home to find a white notice taped to the door. Sheriff's eviction scheduled for 10 days from today. His heart pounded. He had less than 2 weeks to fight an entire system that seemed designed to crush him. Desperate, he attended a town hall meeting that evening, hoping to speak with Councilman Brent Holloway, a white politician known for community outreach. When Malcolm finally cornered him after the meeting, Holloway smiled tightly. "I sympathize with your situation," Holloway said, patting Malcolm's shoulder like one might console a child. "But the bank followed procedure. The best thing you can do is find alternative housing." "Alternative housing," Malcolm snapped. "This isn't just a house, it's my family's history." Holloway's smile faded. "History doesn't pay the bills, son." The word son hung in the air, heavy with condescension. Malcolm stepped back, chest tightening. They'd already decided he didn't belong. The eviction notice wasn't just about money. It was about power, erasure. He returned home, defeated, but not broken. As he sat on the edge of his mother's bed, the weight of generations pressing down on him, one thought crystallized. If they think I'm walking away quietly, they don't know who they're dealing with. The fight had just begun. Malcolm sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, papers scattered across the worn wooden surface. The eviction notice glared back at him like a death sentence, the red ink bold and unforgiving. He'd spent the past 6 hours cross-referencing every document he could find, but the second mortgage agreement still didn't make sense. The handwriting was too shaky, inconsistent with his mother's usual signature. The notary stamp looked official, but something about the ink seemed off, faded unevenly like it had been copied. His laptop hummed softly as he typed "mortgage fraud cases" into the search bar. Page after page of foreclosure horror stories filled the screen. Families forced out of homes due to paperwork errors, predatory loans, and, more often than not, forged signatures. One case stood out, Martin v. Horizon Bank, where a homeowner had successfully challenged foreclosure after proving the mortgage transfer was invalid. The key, discovery, a formal request for all documents related to the loan. Determined, Malcolm scribbled down notes, his mind racing. He needed help, but after being turned away by multiple attorneys, he knew this fight would be his alone. He glanced at the clock. 3:12 a.m. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford. The next morning, Malcolm drove downtown to the courthouse, clutching a folder filled with every piece of evidence he had. The building's marble steps gleamed in the early sunlight, but the weight of systemic bias seemed to seep from the very walls. Inside, he waited nearly an hour before finally reaching the clerk's window. "I need to file a motion for a stay of eviction," Malcolm said, sliding the paperwork across the counter. The clerk, a middle-aged white woman with sharp eyes, barely glanced at the forms before shaking her head. "Are you representing yourself?" she asked, her tone laced with skepticism. "Yes," she exhaled slowly. "You'd be better off finding an attorney. These cases don't usually end well for pro se defendants." "I don't have time for an attorney," Malcolm replied, jaw tightening. "Just file the motion." Reluctantly, she stamped the forms and handed him a copy. "The judge will review it, but don't get your hopes up." By noon, Malcolm was back home, exhaustion pulling at his limbs. He sat on the porch, flipping through the paperwork when his phone buzzed. "Nia, any luck?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. "I filed for a stay. It's a long shot, but it's something." She sighed. "Malcolm, you can't keep pushing like this. What if you lose? What if they come while you're at work and throw everything out on the street?" "I can't think about that," he muttered. "This isn't just about a house. It's about standing up to people who think they can steamroll us because we don't have money or connections." Nia hesitated. "Just don't let this fight destroy you." Malcolm didn't answer. He couldn't. Because deep down, he knew she was right. But surrendering wasn't an option. 2 days later, the court responded, "Motion denied." Malcolm stood in the courthouse hallway, the rejection letter trembling in his hand. His heart pounded as dread settled in his chest. He'd done everything right. gathered evidence, filed paperwork, followed procedures, and still, the system had slammed the door in his face. Fueled by frustration, he stormed into the bank branch, where the second mortgage had originated. Darren Klein, the smirking branch manager, sat behind a polished oak desk, sipping coffee like he hadn't just signed away Malcolm's family legacy. "I need to see the original loan documents for the second mortgage," Malcolm demanded, voice tight with controlled fury. Klein leaned back, lazily adjusting his tie. "I already told you, Mr. Reese, the foreclosure is final. You're wasting everyone's time." "Then prove it. Show me the documents." Klein's smile widened, predatory and cold. "File a discovery request. Otherwise, this conversation is over." Malcolm's fists clenched, but he knew arguing wouldn't get him anywhere. He turned on his heel and walked out, humiliation burning in his chest. Outside, the hot sun beat down as he sat in his car, hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Later that evening, back at the community center where he worked part-time, Malcolm cleaned the empty halls, his mind churning with frustration. One of the volunteers, Mrs. Holloway, an elderly black woman who'd lived through the civil rights movement, watched him quietly. "Baby, you look like the world's sitting on your shoulders," she finally said. Malcolm sighed, leaning on the mop handle. "It kind of feels that way," she nodded, thoughtful. "My daddy always said when they push you to the edge, you got two choices, fall or fight. But if you're gonna fight, you'd best know their game better than they do." Her words hit Malcolm like a lightning bolt. The law. He didn't need a lawyer if he could become his own expert. The system was designed to confuse and intimidate, but laws were written down. He could study them, learn them, use them. That night, Malcolm cleared the kitchen table and spread out every document he had. He borrowed law books from the library, printed foreclosure guidelines from the state website, and started highlighting, cross-referencing, and jotting down notes. Sleep became an afterthought. He spent every free moment buried in paperwork, fueled by coffee and determination. Days blurred together until finally he found it, a single line in the foreclosure statute. All mortgage transfers must be accompanied by a valid endorsement from the previous lender. It was a technicality, but a powerful one. Malcolm pulled the bank's filings and froze. The last transfer of his mother's mortgage lacked the required endorsement. Legally, the bank had no right to foreclose. Heart racing, he filed a new motion, this time requesting full discovery of all documents related to the mortgage. He knew it was a gamble. The judge could dismiss it outright. But if they approved, the bank would have to reveal everything. 2 days later, he received the court's response. Motion for discovery granted. Malcolm sat on the couch, paper trembling in his hands. He'd done it. He'd forced the system to acknowledge his fight. But as relief washed over him, another realization hit. The bank wouldn't go down quietly. They'd retaliate, and they did. The very next morning, his bank account was frozen due to a fraud investigation. His utility bills, set to auto-pay, bounced. The electricity cut off by evening. When he called the bank, they claimed it was a technical issue. But the smug tone in Darren Klein's voice told him the truth. Later that night, Naya showed up, her face tight with worry. "Your car's gone." "What?" Malcolm rushed outside. His old sedan, parked at the curb, was missing. "Repossession," a neighbor called from across the street. "Tow truck came by an hour ago, looked official." Malcolm's chest tightened. It wasn't just about the house anymore. They were trying to break him, to make him quit. He stood there, fists clenched at his sides, heart pounding in his ears. They'd underestimated him. He wasn't just fighting for his home now. He was fighting for every person who'd ever been crushed by a system designed to keep them powerless. Was Malcolm pushing too far, risking everything for a fight he couldn't win? Or was this the moment that would define his future? Comment number 1 if you believe Malcolm is right to keep fighting, even when the odds are stacked against him. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story if you stand for justice. But here's the real question. If the system itself is corrupt, how far will Malcolm have to go to expose the truth? And will he survive the battle? Stay tuned for the next part. Malcolm sat in the dimly lit kitchen, the hum of the fridge the only sound breaking the silence. His utilities were still off, his bank account frozen, and his car gone. The system was retaliating, trying to choke him out, but the court's approval of his discovery request was more than just a lifeline. It was a weapon. He just had to wield it correctly. The next morning, Malcolm walked into the courthouse, his steps purposeful despite the exhaustion pulling at his limbs. He handed the clerk his official request for discovery, detailing every document he needed from the bank. The original mortgage agreement, all transfer records, and the notarized second mortgage papers they claimed his mother had signed. The clerk, a younger black woman named Tasha, glanced at the papers and gave him a tired but knowing smile. "Fighting the bank?" she asked quietly. "Every damn day," Malcolm muttered. "Well," she said, stamping the request, "most people give up by now. Good luck." Luck had nothing to do with it, Malcolm thought. This was survival. 3 days later, the bank responded, not with the requested documents, but with a motion to dismiss the discovery request entirely, claiming it was overly broad and burdensome. Malcolm read the filing twice, fury building with every word. They weren't even pretending to follow the rules. Without missing a beat, Malcolm drafted a counter motion citing specific case law he'd found during his late-night research. He hand-delivered it to the courthouse, earning another nod from Tasha as she accepted the paperwork. That same afternoon, he received a call from Judge Crawley's chambers. The judge wanted an in-person hearing to address the excessive nature of Malcolm's discovery request. Malcolm knew what that meant. The judge was giving the bank another chance to crush him in open court. 2 days later, Malcolm stood before the bench, facing off against Bryce Lambert, the bank's lead attorney. Lambert was everything Malcolm expected: slick hair, tailored suit, and a condescending smile that barely hid his contempt. "Your Honor," Lambert began smoothly, "this request is nothing more than a fishing expedition. Mr. Reese is grasping at straws, trying to delay an inevitable foreclosure." Judge Crawley, lounging back in his chair, nodded lazily. "Mr. Reese, why should I make the bank jump through hoops for you?" Malcolm stepped forward, holding up 2 copies of the mortgage agreement, the original and the one with the second mortgage. "Because, Your Honor, the bank filed 2 versions of the same document. Look at the signatures, they don't match. My mother's signature is consistent on everything else, but here, it's completely different." Crawley glanced at the papers, clearly uninterested. "Signatures change over time." "Not in 3 months," Malcolm shot back. "And not when the second signature was supposedly signed the day after my mother was hospitalized for a stroke." That got Crawley's attention. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "You're saying the bank falsified documents?" "I'm saying," Malcolm replied, voice steady, "that without full discovery we'll never know. If they have nothing to hide, they should have no problem providing the original paperwork." Lambert's smile faltered. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. The foreclosure was executed according to standard procedure." Crawley sighed, rubbing his temple. He hated being put in a position where he had to look impartial. "Fine," he muttered. "Discovery request stands. The bank has 7 days to produce the documents." Malcolm's heart pounded as Crawley banged the gavel. It wasn't a win, not yet, but it was a step forward. Lambert shot him a cold glare, already plotting his next move. Outside the courtroom, Malcolm barely made it to the courthouse steps before his phone buzzed. It was Naya. "Did you win?" she asked anxiously. "Not a win," Malcolm replied, staring at the courthouse doors. "But they have to hand over the documents." There was a pause. "And if they don't?" "Then," Malcolm said quietly, "we'll know the fraud goes deeper than I thought." But Malcolm didn't even get a chance to wait the full 7 days. 3 days later, he came home from his night shift at the community center to find 2 movers hauling his mother's old couch out the front door. "What the hell are you doing?" Malcolm shouted, rushing up the cracked concrete steps. The sheriff's deputy, standing by the curb, a burly white man with mirrored sunglasses, barely glanced at him. "Eviction order, effective immediately." "Eviction?" Malcolm's stomach dropped. The court granted a stay. "Not anymore," the deputy drawled, holding up a fresh order signed by Judge Crawley. "Bank filed new evidence this morning. Foreclosure's final." Malcolm snatched the paper, his hands shaking. The new evidence was a revised version of the mortgage transfer, complete with a notarized signature. A forgery, undoubtedly, but polished enough to fool anyone not looking closely. He spun toward the movers. "Stop! That couch belonged to my grandmother." "Not your house anymore, buddy," one of them muttered, dropping the couch unceremoniously on the lawn. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, some watching with pity, others with thinly veiled satisfaction. One man across the street chuckled, arms crossed. "Should have known better than to think you'd keep a place like this." Malcolm stood frozen as the movers stripped the house bare. His family's history, their memories, reduced to furniture on a curb. By nightfall, Malcolm sat on the front steps, defeated, the street lamp casting long shadows across the empty lawn. His phone buzzed again. "Nia, where are you?" she asked, voice tight with worry. "Home," Malcolm muttered bitterly, "or what's left of it." "Come stay with me," she pleaded. "You can't sleep outside." But Malcolm couldn't move. He stared at the empty doorway, the house dark and lifeless. This wasn't just about a home anymore, this was war. They'd rigged the system, forged documents, weaponized the courts, and gotten away with it. Until now. Malcolm stood slowly, determination hardening his features. If they wanted a fight, he'd give them one. He wasn't just fighting for a house anymore. He was fighting for justice, for his mother's legacy, for everyone the system had ever crushed and discarded, because if they could do this to him, they could do it to anyone. And Malcolm Rees wasn't about to let that happen. Malcolm sat on the curb outside his mother's empty house, the cold seeping through his worn jacket as night settled over the neighborhood. His belongings, what little hadn't been broken or stolen, were scattered across the lawn, a stark reminder of how quickly everything could be taken. The eviction crew had been efficient, almost mechanical, tossing decades of memories onto the street like garbage. His phone buzzed. Nia. Again. He let it ring. What could he say? That everything they'd worked for was gone? That the system had crushed him, just like it had crushed so many before? Instead, he stood slowly, determination stiffening his spine. They wanted him broken, silent, erased. But Malcolm Rees wasn't done fighting. The next morning, he walked into the courthouse, head held high despite the exhaustion dragging at his limbs. He filed an emergency motion to contest the eviction, armed with copies of the forged documents the bank had used to push it through. As he handed the papers to the clerk, she gave him a tired, almost pitying look. "You're back again?" She sighed, stamping the motion. "Mr. Rees, I don't mean to sound cruel, but you really think you can win this?" Malcolm's jaw tightened. "I don't think," he said quietly. "I know." But the system wasn't finished punishing him. That afternoon, as he left the courthouse, a patrol car eased up alongside him. The officer inside, a pale man with a buzz cut and mirrored sunglasses, leaned out the window. "Mr. Rees," the cop drawled. Malcolm stopped, heart pounding. "Yeah? Got a report about someone matching your description loitering around private property." The officer gestured toward the courthouse. "Mind explaining why you're hanging around?" "Here?" Malcolm's fists clenched. "I'm filing legal documents, that's what courthouses are for." The officer smirked. Sure. Just making sure you're not causing trouble. You know how it is." Malcolm didn't respond. He knew exactly how it was. Later that evening, he found himself sitting in the community center's break room, sipping bitter coffee from a chipped mug. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the peeling walls. Mrs. Holloway, the elderly volunteer who'd once told him to know their game, shuffled in, her face creased with worry. "Baby, you look like you've been fighting the whole world," she said, settling into the chair across from him. Malcolm managed a tired smile. "Feels that way." "Well, don't let 'em beat you down," she said, voice firm despite her age. "You got more fight in you than they ever counted on." Her words stayed with him as he left the center, walking back to the small motel room he'd scraped together enough money to rent. But even that fragile sense of safety didn't last long. 2 days later, while Malcolm was reviewing his court filings at a diner, his phone buzzed with an alert. "Your bank account has been frozen due to suspicious activity." His stomach sank. Without access to his money, he couldn't pay for the motel, food, or even transportation. It wasn't a coincidence. The bank was tightening the noose, Desperate, he called the bank's fraud department, only to be met with the same smug voice he'd come to despise, Darren Klein. "Mr. Reese," Klein drawled, sounding almost amused. "Looks like there's been some unusual activity on your account. Standard procedure to freeze it while we investigate." "What unusual activity?" Malcolm demanded, gripping the phone tighter. Klein chuckled. "Hard to say. Might be all those legal filings. Funny how paperwork tends to stir up trouble." Malcolm's hand shook as he ended the call. This wasn't just about a house anymore. They were trying to destroy his life piece by piece, until he had no choice but to walk away. That evening, things got worse. As Malcolm stepped out of the motel lobby, two sheriff's deputies approached, hands resting on their holstered weapons. "Malcolm." "Reese?" one asked, eyes cold. "Yeah," Malcolm replied cautiously. "Need you to come with us," the deputy said. "You've been reported for trespassing at a private residence." Malcolm blinked. "Trespassing? Where?" The deputy smirked. "Your old house. Neighbor said you were snooping around." "I haven't been near that house since they threw me out," Malcolm snapped, frustration boiling over. "Tell it to the judge," the other deputy muttered, snapping handcuffs around Malcolm's wrists before he could protest further. Hours later, Malcolm sat in a holding cell, the sour stench of old sweat and disinfectant burning his nose. He hadn't been officially charged, just detained for questioning. The message was clear: back off or face real consequences. When they finally released him just before dawn, his phone was dead, his wallet nearly empty, and the motel had already locked him out for non-payment. Homeless, broke, and exhausted, Malcolm sat on a bench outside the station, head in his hands. But the fire inside him hadn't gone out. If anything, it burned hotter. They'd frozen his money, taken his home, and thrown him in a cell without cause, but they hadn't taken his mind or his determination. By sunrise, Malcolm was back, at the library, poring over foreclosure law once more, and that's when he found it, another crack in the bank's armor. The transfer of his mother's mortgage had changed hands 3 times, but the final transfer lacked a crucial endorsement. Without it, the bank had no legal standing to foreclose. It was a small technicality, buried deep in jargon most people would overlook, but Malcolm saw it for what it was, a lifeline. He filed another motion, this time challenging the bank's standing to foreclose based on the missing endorsement. The next day, as Malcolm exited the courthouse, Bryce Lambert was waiting for him on the steps, arms crossed, a smug smile playing on his lips. "Mr. Reese," Lambert drawled, "I admire. Your persistence, really I do, but you're wasting your time. We've already filed a motion to dismiss your latest nonsense." Malcolm didn't flinch. "Funny thing about the law, Mr. Lambert, it doesn't care how many fancy suits you own. If you don't have standing, you don't have a case." Lambert's smile flickered just for a moment. Malcolm saw the crack, the first real sign that his fight was working. But the bank wasn't done retaliating. That evening, Malcolm returned to the community center to find the director, a middle-aged white man named Tom Brooks, waiting for him by the door, arms crossed. "Malcolm," Brooks said, his expression tight, "I hate to do this, but I have to let you go." Malcolm blinked, stunned. "What? Why?" Brooks sighed, avoiding eye contact. "We've had complaints, people saying you're bringing unwanted attention to the center. Donors are nervous. I can't afford to lose funding over this." Malcolm's breath caught. They weren't just going after him, they were cutting off every avenue of survival, his job, his money, his home. They were trying to erase him entirely. By the time Malcolm stumbled back to the motel, now forced to sneak in through the side door since he couldn't pay for another night, he was running on fumes. He collapsed onto the thin mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering how much longer he could hold out. Was this fight even winnable? Or was Malcolm pushing against a system too powerful to break? Comment number 1 if you think Malcolm should keep fighting no matter the cost. Like, subscribe, and share this story if you believe the system needs to be held accountable. But here's the real question. When the system itself becomes the enemy, how far can one man go before it breaks him, or he breaks it? Stay tuned for the next part. Malcolm sat on the edge of the motel bed, phone in hand, staring blankly at the dark screen. His bank account was frozen, his job gone, and he was officially homeless. The system hadn't just beaten him down, it had stripped him bare piece by piece, until survival itself felt like a daily rebellion. He hadn't eaten since the stale gas station sandwich the night before, and the rumbling hunger in his stomach was nothing compared to the burning frustration in his chest. He knew this. Fight wasn't just about paperwork anymore. It was about power. Who had it, who didn't, and how the system was rigged to make sure people like him stayed powerless. But Malcolm still had one thing they couldn't freeze, steal, or evict: his mind. He spent the morning at the public library, poring over case law, foreclosure statutes, and civil rights litigation. He jotted down notes furiously, his pen scratching across the yellow legal pad until his hand cramped. He didn't notice the woman watching him from across the room until she approached, dropping a thick folder onto the table with a soft thud. "You're fighting First Union, aren't you?" she asked quietly. Malcolm blinked, startled. The woman was in her late 20s, Latina, with sharp eyes that spoke of long hours spent under fluorescent lights. Her ID badge, clipped to her cardigan, read Linda Ortiz, paralegal. "Who's asking?" Malcolm replied cautiously. "Someone who hates seeing people get steamrolled," Linda said, pulling out a chair. "I used to work in their legal department. Saw too many families lose their homes because they didn't know how to fight back. I couldn't live with it, so I left. But not before I made copies of certain things." She pushed the folder toward him. Malcolm hesitated, then flipped it open. Inside were internal memos, emails, and scanned documents, some marked confidential, detailing how the bank had fast-tracked foreclosures in predominantly black and brown neighborhoods. One memo stood out: priority processing for high-risk properties, minimize litigation exposure by expediting evictions before challenges can be filed. "High risk," Malcolm muttered, brow furrowing. "That's corporate speak for black-owned," Linda said bitterly. "They targeted neighborhoods like yours because they figured people wouldn't have the resources to fight back." Malcolm's throat tightened. He'd suspected racism played a role, but seeing it spelled out so coldly made his blood boil. "Why are you giving me this?" he asked, eyes narrowing. "If the bank finds out," "They won't," Linda cut in. "I already lost my job over this. But if you can use it to stop them from stealing your house, it's worth it." Malcolm nodded slowly. He didn't trust easily anymore, but the anger in Linda's eyes was real. She wasn't offering charity. She was handing him a weapon. "Thank you," Malcolm said quietly, gripping the folder like a lifeline. "This changes everything." But the victory was short-lived. 2 days later, Malcolm returned to the library after another fruitless trip to the courthouse, only to find Linda waiting for him by the front steps, her face pale and tight. "They fired me," she said, voice shaking. "Someone tipped them off. They said I violated company policy by accessing restricted documents." Malcolm's stomach sank. "Did they mention me?" Linda nodded grimly. "Not by name, but they made it clear. They know someone's challenging the foreclosure, and they're circling the wagons." Before Malcolm could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and cursed under her breath. "My bank account's frozen, just like yours was." Hit Malcolm like a punch to the gut. The bank wasn't just playing defense anymore. They were retaliating hard and fast against anyone who dared to stand in their way. "So you need to lay low," Malcolm urged. "They're not just after me now, they'll come for you too." Linda hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Be careful, Malcolm. They play dirty." That night, as Malcolm sat in the corner of a 24-hour diner, nursing a cup of burnt coffee, his phone vibrated. An unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Reese." The voice was smooth, male, with the practiced politeness of someone used to wielding authority. "This is Bryce Lambert, counsel for First Union Bank. I'd like to offer you an opportunity to settle this matter quietly." Malcolm's jaw clenched. "Quietly? You mean give up my mother's house and pretend none of this ever happened?" "Precisely," Lambert replied, his tone almost cheerful. "In exchange, we'll unfreeze your accounts, clear your credit, and provide a modest relocation stipend. You can start fresh, Mr. Reese. Walk away while you still can." Malcolm gripped the phone tighter. "And if I don't?" Lambert's politeness evaporated. "Then we'll bury you. Your case will get tied up in procedural motions until you can't afford to fight anymore. You'll lose the house, your job prospects, everything. And when you finally crawl away, broke and broken, you'll realize you should have taken the deal. The line went dead. Malcolm sat there, heart pounding, rage building with every breath. They weren't even pretending to follow the law anymore. They were playing the game the only way they knew how, through intimidation and brute force. The next morning, Malcolm walked into the courthouse to file another motion, this time demanding a full audit of the mortgage transfers under the state's anti-predatory lending statute. He knew it was a long shot, but it was the only card he had left to play. As he exited the building, his phone buzzed again. "Naya, you need to stop," she said, her voice tight with fear. "I saw two men outside my apartment last night, watching the door. I called the cops, but they just shrugged it off. This fight, it's not just about you anymore, Malcolm. It's spreading." Malcolm's breath caught. He'd expected retaliation, but not like this, not targeting the people he cared about. "Naya," he said quietly, "I can't stop. If they win, it's not just my house. It's every house they've stolen, every family they've crushed because they thought no one would fight back." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Nia sighed. "Then fight smart, because they're playing for keeps." That night, Malcolm sat alone in the motel room, the flickering light from the neon sign outside, casting restless shadows on the wall. He'd gained an ally, lost her, and now the bank was tightening its grip not just on him, but on anyone connected to his fight. He flipped through Linda's folder once more, eyes scanning the damning memos and forged signatures. The evidence was strong, but evidence alone wouldn't win this battle. He needed something more, something they couldn't counter with legal tricks or corporate muscle. And then it hit him. The notary. The signature on the second mortgage had been notarized, but if the notary hadn't actually witnessed the signing, the entire document was invalid. Fraud, perjury, a criminal offense. Heart pounding, Malcolm grabbed his phone and started searching state notary databases. After an hour of digging, he found her. Denise Fowler, licensed notary. Last known address 2 towns over. If he could find her, and if she was willing to talk, he might finally have the leverage he needed to turn the tide. But in the back of his mind, one nagging thought remained. How far would the bank go to protect its power? Malcolm had already lost his home, his job, and nearly everything else. What was left for them to take? He'd find out soon enough, because Malcolm wasn't backing down, not now, not ever. Malcolm sat at the edge of his motel bed, the flickering neon light from the vacancy sign outside, casting restless shadows across the room. In his lap, Linda's folder lay open, filled with damning evidence of the bank's corruption. But evidence alone wasn't enough. He needed a witness, someone who could confirm the forgery. And Denise Fowler, the notary listed on the second mortgage, was his best shot. The next morning, Malcolm drove 2 towns over in a borrowed car, every mile stretching his nerves tighter. He found Denise's house, a modest 1-story home with peeling white paint and a sun-faded "Beware of Dog" sign on the gate. He knocked twice, heart pounding. After a moment, the door cracked open, and a middle-aged black woman with tired eyes peered out. "Ms. Fowler?" Malcolm asked, holding up a copy of the notarized document. "I need to talk to you about this signature." Her eyes flicked to the paper and her face paled. "I can't help you," she muttered, starting to close the door. "Please," Malcolm pressed, foot in the doorway. "This isn't just about me. They're stealing homes. Families are losing everything because of signatures like this." Denise hesitated, guilt flickering across her face. Finally, she sighed and stepped aside. Inside, the house was neat but sparse, the air thick with the scent of burnt coffee. She gestured toward the couch, but Malcolm remained standing. "I didn't witness that signature," Denise admitted quietly, not meeting his gaze. "A bank rep brought me the papers, said the client was sick and couldn't come in. They told me it was just a formality. I stamped it without thinking." "Do you realize what that means?" Malcolm asked, voice tight. "They used your notary stamp to forge a loan. That's fraud, perjury. It invalidates the entire foreclosure." "I know," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "But if I testify, they'll come after me. My job, my house, everything. Malcolm swallowed hard. He couldn't promise her safety, but he could promise the truth. If we don't fight this, they'll keep doing it. To more families, to more people like us. Denise wiped her eyes and nodded, slowly. I'll testify. With Denise's statement in hand, Malcolm returned to the courthouse, filing an emergency motion to reopen the case based on newly discovered fraud. Judge Crawley, clearly irritated by Malcolm's persistence, set a hearing for the following week. It wasn't immediate relief, but it was progress. But the bank wasn't done playing dirty. 2 days later, Malcolm woke to find his motel door ajar, the lock busted. Inside, the room was ransacked, papers scattered, drawers overturned, his laptop gone. His heart pounded as he rifled through the mess. The folder with Linda's documents was missing. Panicked, he called Linda, but the line went straight to voicemail. He tried Denise next. "Ms. Fowler, are you okay?" he asked the moment she picked up. "I'm fine," she said, voice shaking. "But 2 men came by my job asking questions. They knew I talked to you." Malcolm cursed under his breath. The bank was tightening the noose. But instead of scaring him off, it only fueled his determination. He spent the next few days preparing for the hearing, barely sleeping, surviving on gas station coffee and adrenaline. He combed through foreclosure statutes, memorized case law, and printed duplicate copies of every document they'd tried to steal. He wasn't just fighting for his house anymore. He was fighting to expose the entire corrupt system. The day of the hearing arrived, the air thick with tension as Malcolm stepped into the courtroom. Bryce Lambert sat at the plaintiff's table, his usual smugness replaced with something colder, more calculating. Judge Crawley barely glanced at Malcolm as he took his seat. "Mr. Reese," Crawley drawled, flipping through the case file. "Back again, I see." "Yes, Your Honor," Malcolm replied, voice steady. "And this time I have proof of fraud." Lambert stood immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. These claims are baseless and intended to delay lawful foreclosure." "Baseless?" Malcolm snapped, holding up the notary affidavit signed by Denise Fowler. "This document proves the bank submitted a forged mortgage agreement. The notary herself confirmed she never witnessed the signature. That makes the foreclosure not just illegal, but criminal." The courtroom fell silent. Crawley's brows furrowed as he leaned forward, finally paying attention. "Mr. Lambert," the judge said slowly, "do you have an explanation for this?" Lambert's jaw clenched. "Your Honor, we were unaware of any irregularities. We'll need time." To verify these claims, Malcolm stepped forward. "Time. The bank has already evicted me. They've frozen my accounts, destroyed my credit, and harassed witnesses. How much more time do they need to cover their tracks?" Crawley sighed heavily, clearly annoyed, but unable to ignore the evidence. "Fine. The court will grant a temporary stay of foreclosure until this matter is investigated." Malcolm exhaled, relief washing over him. It wasn't a final victory, but it was the first real crack in the bank's armor. Outside the courthouse, Denise approached Malcolm, visibly shaken. "They're not going to let this go, are they?" "No," Malcolm admitted, "but neither are we." That night back in the motel, Malcolm received an anonymous text. "You should have taken the settlement. This isn't over." He stared at the screen, anger bubbling beneath his exhaustion. The bank was wounded, but a wounded predator was even more dangerous. They'd retaliate, harder and faster than before. Would Malcolm's determination be enough to withstand the next wave of attacks? Or was he pushing too far, risking everything for a fight he couldn't win? Comment number 1 if you believe Malcolm should keep fighting, no matter the cost. Like, subscribe, and share if you stand for justice. But here's the real question. With the bank backed into a corner and the stakes higher than ever, what ruthless move will they make next, and will Malcolm survive it? Stay tuned for the next part. Malcolm barely slept the night after the hearing. The temporary stay of foreclosure was a small win, but he knew the bank wouldn't take it quietly. He kept his phone close, expecting the next blow to fall. When it came, it wasn't subtle. 2 days later, Malcolm walked into the courthouse to check the status of his discovery request. The clerk, a middle-aged white woman with tired eyes, glanced at her computer and frowned. "Your case has been flagged for procedural review," she said, typing furiously. "It's been removed from the active docket pending further evaluation." Malcolm's heart sank. What does that mean? The judge just granted the stay. The clerk shrugged. It means someone filed an emergency motion to reconsider. Until the judge reviews it, the stay is effectively paused. Malcolm stepped back from the counter, blood pounding in his ears. Reconsideration. It was a legal loophole, a stalling tactic used to bury cases until the other side ran out of money or time, and Malcolm was running out of both. His phone buzzed. As he left the courthouse, it was Denise Fowler. "They froze my accounts," she said, panic lacing her voice. "I can't access my paycheck, and my landlord's already threatening eviction." Malcolm cursed under his breath. "Stay calm. They're trying to intimidate us." "Well, it's working," Denise snapped. "I'm losing everything because I helped you." Before Malcolm could respond, another call flashed across his screen. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Reese." Bryce Lambert's smooth, condescending voice filled the line. "It seems you've stirred up quite the mess. I warned you this would happen." Malcolm's grip tightened around the phone. "You're freezing accounts now? Harassing witnesses?" "That's witness tampering, Lambert," Lambert chuckled. "Big words for a man sleeping in a motel. This isn't about law anymore, Mr. Reese. It's about survival. Walk away and maybe we'll stop squeezing." Malcolm hung up, fury boiling in his chest. The bank wasn't just fighting his case. They were trying to destroy his life piece by piece. By the time he returned to the motel, the front desk clerk was waiting for him, arms crossed. "Mr. Reese, your card was declined. You're behind. 2 nights, I need payment by tomorrow morning or you're out." Malcolm didn't argue. What was the point? His account was frozen, his savings gone. He gathered his few belongings and spent the night in his car, parked in a dimly lit corner of the community center's lot. The irony wasn't lost on him, fighting for a home while sleeping in the back seat of a borrowed car. The next morning, hunger gnawed at his stomach as he walked to the library. He bought a coffee with the last crumpled dollar in his pocket and settled into a corner table, flipping through the legal notes he'd painstakingly compiled. His phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Linda Ortiz. "Call me. Found something." Malcolm dialed immediately. Linda answered on the first ring, her voice hushed. "I got into the bank's internal system one last time before they revoked my access. There's an email chain, Lambert and Klein discussing how they accelerated your eviction by submitting revised documents without proper filing." They knew the judge wouldn't look closely. Malcolm's breath caught. "Do you have the emails?" "I saved screenshots," Linda said, "but if I share them, I'm done. Blacklisted from every firm in the state." "I get it," Malcolm said quietly. "But this isn't just about me anymore." Linda sighed heavily. "I'll send them, but be careful. They're playing for keeps." The screenshots arrived minutes later, emails between Lambert, Klein, and even Judge Crawley's assistant, discussing how they'd bypassed normal procedures to rush Malcolm's foreclosure. It was blatant corruption, the kind that could blow the case wide open, but before Malcolm could file the new evidence, the bank struck again. That afternoon, while Malcolm was printing copies of the emails at a FedEx store, his phone rang. "Naya." "Malcolm," she said, voice trembling. "2 guys in suits came to my job. They asked my manager if I was involved in illegal activities. My boss said if I bring any more heat, I'm fired." Malcolm closed his eyes, the weight of it all crashing down. They weren't just targeting him anymore. They were going after everyone around him. Linda, Denise, Nia. The bank wasn't just fighting to win. They were fighting to destroy. By the time Malcolm returned to the motel that evening, the lock on his room had been changed. The manager, a stout man with a permanent scowl, stood by the door. "Can't let you back in without payment," the man said, arms crossed. Malcolm didn't argue. He slung his backpack over his shoulder and walked away, shoulders sagging under the weight of defeat. Homeless, broke. And now his evidence was worthless if he couldn't survive long enough to use it. He spent that night in a 24-hour laundromat, nodding off in a plastic chair while the dryers hummed around him. When the sun rose, he walked to the courthouse, determined to file the new evidence no matter what. But when he reached the clerk's office, the same tired woman from before shook her head. "Judge Crawley's calendar is full. He won't hear any new motions until next month." "Next month?" Malcolm snapped. "By then they'll have sold the house," she shrugged. "Sorry, Mr. Reese. I don't make the rules." Malcolm stumbled out of the courthouse, heart pounding. They'd shut every door, cut every lifeline. For the first time since the fight began, he felt truly defeated. That night he sat in his car, parked under a flickering street lamp, staring at the courthouse in the distance. He'd fought with everything he had, his time, his money, his sanity, and the system had chewed him up and spit him out. Was this how it ended? Broken, homeless, forgotten? But as Malcolm sat there, exhausted and hollow, he thought of his mother. Of her calloused hands after double shifts at the diner, of the way she'd smiled, tired but proud when she made the final mortgage payment. She'd fought her whole life against a system designed to break her, and she'd never given up. Neither would he. With shaking hands, Malcolm opened his laptop, using the free Wi-Fi from the diner across the street. He drafted a motion for an emergency hearing, citing newly discovered fraud and potential judicial misconduct. He attached the screenshots from Linda, the affidavit from Denise, and a timeline of every retaliatory move the bank had made. Then he filed it, electronically, immediately, with copies sent to every local news outlet he could find. Malcolm didn't sleep that night. He sat in his car watching the courthouse lights flicker off one by one, waiting for the next blow because he knew it was coming. And this time, he'd be ready. Malcolm woke up in the driver's seat of the borrowed car, stiff and cold from another night spent parked outside the courthouse. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat, an email notification. Heart pounding, he unlocked the screen and stared. At the subject line, emergency motion, hearing scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m. Relief flooded through him, but it was short-lived. Friday was only 2 days away, and the bank wouldn't sit quietly. He needed more than evidence now. He needed reinforcements. That afternoon, Malcolm walked into the office of the Justice Collective, a small civil rights group known for taking on cases of systemic injustice. The receptionist, a young black woman with box braids and a skeptical look, raised an eyebrow as he approached. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, glancing at the battered backpack slung over his shoulder. "No," Malcolm admitted, placing Linda's folder and the newly filed motion on the desk. "But I have proof of a bank committing fraud, harassing witnesses and using the courts to steal homes. And if someone doesn't help me, they're going to get away with it." The receptionist hesitated, eyeing the papers. Then she sighed and picked up the phone. "Wait here." 15 minutes later, Malcolm was sitting across from Terrence Boyd, one of the collective's lead attorneys. Boyd, a tall black man with graying hair and the weary look of someone who'd fought too many uphill battles, flipped through the documents silently. When he finally spoke, his voice was grim. "Damn," Boyd muttered, holding up the email chain between Lambert and Klein. "They didn't even try to hide it. This is textbook foreclosure fraud. And Crawley's involvement?" He shook his head. "If this gets out, it'll blow up the whole racket." "So you'll help?" Malcolm asked, barely daring to hope. Boyd nodded. "We'll file an amicus brief supporting your motion and start prepping for Friday. But listen, Malcolm, this isn't just a foreclosure case anymore. If you push this, you're going to expose a whole network of corruption. The bank, the judge, maybe even higher up. They'll come after you harder than ever." Malcolm's jaw tightened. "They've already taken everything. I've got nothing left to lose." Boyd studied him for a long moment, then extended his hand. "All right, let's make some noise." The next 48 hours were a blur. Boyd's team worked through the night, drafting motions, contacting media outlets, and rallying community organizations. Malcolm barely slept, running on adrenaline and cheap coffee. Every time his phone buzzed, he expected more retaliation. Frozen account, another eviction notice, maybe even an arrest warrant. But nothing came. It was too quiet. The bank was regrouping, planning something. Friday morning arrived grey and cold. Malcolm stood outside the courthouse, clutching the worn manila folder that had become his lifeline. Nia arrived first, face drawn with worry but determination shining in her eyes. "You ready for this?" she asked quietly. "Ready as I'll ever be," Malcolm replied, squeezing her hand. Then Denise Fowler appeared, glancing nervously over her shoulder as she hurried up the steps. "I'm here," she said breathlessly. "I'll testify, but if they retaliate..." "They won't," Boyd interrupted, stepping beside Malcolm. "We've got reporters inside. This hearing's public record now. They can't sweep it under the rug." Together, they entered the courtroom. It was packed. Reporters, community activists, and curious onlookers filled the gallery. Malcolm spotted Linda Ortiz near the back, nodding silently in support. At the plaintiff's table, Bryce Lambert sat stiffly, his usual smugness replaced by cold calculation. Judge Crawley, clearly irritated by the attention, adjusted his robe and banged the gavel. "This is an emergency hearing regarding the foreclosure of 1628 Pine Street," Crawley announced, voice sharp. "Mr. Reese, you may proceed." Malcolm stood, heart pounding. He'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in his head. "Your Honor," Malcolm began, "this foreclosure is based on fraudulent documents. The second mortgage my mother allegedly signed was notarized without her presence. The notary, Denise Fowler, is here to testify." Crawley's eyes flickered with something, annoyance? Fear? Before he leaned back. "Proceed." Denise stepped forward, hands trembling as she took the oath. Under Boyd's gentle questioning, she confirmed everything. She'd stamped the document without witnessing the signature, under pressure from a bank representative. Lambert shot to his feet. "Objection! This is hearsay and irrelevant to the foreclosure process." Malcolm didn't wait for the judge's response. He stepped forward, holding up the email chain from Linda's folder. "Irrelevant? These emails between Mr. Lambert and Darren, Klein show they knew the documents were forged and rushed the eviction anyway. They even discussed bypassing standard procedures to avoid scrutiny." The gallery erupted in murmurs. Crawley banged the gavel, face darkening. "Order, Mr. Reese, do you have proof that these emails are authentic?" Boyd rose smoothly. "We subpoenaed the bank's internal servers yesterday, Your Honor. The metadata confirms authenticity. The court has a duty to investigate." Lambert's face paled. He leaned toward Crawley, whispering furiously. The judge's lips thinned, and for a moment, Malcolm thought he might dismiss the motion outright. Evidence be damned. But then something shifted. The gallery's murmurs grew louder, phones flashing as reporters texted updates in real time. Crawley's gaze swept the room, and Malcolm saw the realization dawn in his eyes. This case was already bigger than the courtroom. It was public, unstoppable. With visible reluctance, Crawley sighed and banged the gavel once more. "The court will conduct a full review of the foreclosure process, including the authenticity of the mortgage documents. Until then, the foreclosure." Gers stayed, and Mr. Reese retains possession of the property. Malcolm's knees nearly buckled. He'd done it. He'd stopped the eviction, but victory tasted hollow. As the crowd filtered out, Lambert brushed past Malcolm, his expression icy. "You think this is over?" he hissed. "You just made enemies you can't afford." Malcolm didn't flinch. "So did you." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. Boyd fielded questions while Malcolm stood quietly, exhaustion finally crashing over him. Naya slipped her hand into his. "You won," she murmured. "At least for now." "Yeah," Malcolm said, voice rough. "But they're not done. They'll come back harder." And they would. The bank had too much to lose. Crawley had too many secrets to protect. Malcolm had forced them into the light, but cornered animals were the most dangerous. Had Malcolm really secured his home, or had he just triggered a retaliation that could destroy him completely? Comment number 1 if you believe Malcolm should. Keep fighting, no matter the risk. Like, subscribe, and share if you believe justice is worth the struggle. But here's the real question. With the bank wounded and desperate, what ruthless move will they make next? And can Malcolm survive it? Stay tuned for the next part. Friday morning arrived colder and grayer than usual, the sky hanging low over the courthouse like a warning. Malcolm stood on the steps, gripping his folder of evidence so tightly his knuckles turned white. This hearing wasn't just about his house anymore. It was about survival. His, Denise's, Linda's, and everyone else the bank had steamrolled without consequence. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the back rows, cameras flashing despite the bailiff's half-hearted warnings. On the plaintiff's side, Bryce Lambert sat with his usual polished arrogance, but there was tension in his jaw, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the table. Behind him, Darren Klein, the bank's regional manager, whispered furiously to a junior associate, The bank had brought in reinforcements. Malcolm didn't have reinforcements, just Terence Boyd from the Justice Collective, Denise Fowler, and the truth. It would have to be enough. Judge Crawley entered, face tight with irritation. He glanced at the crowd, clearly displeased by the media presence, and banged his gavel with more force than necessary. "This court is now in session," Crawley intoned. "We're here to address the emergency motion filed by Mr. Malcolm Rees regarding alleged foreclosure fraud by First Union Bank." He turned to Lambert. "Mr. Lambert, you may proceed with your opening statement." Lambert rose smoothly, buttoning his tailored jacket with practiced ease. His confidence had returned, like a man who'd been assured victory behind closed doors. "Your Honor," Lambert began, his voice rich and smooth, "this case is nothing more than a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable. Mr. Rees defaulted on his mortgage. The bank followed standard foreclosure procedures, as it has done thousands of times without incident. The claims of fraud are baseless, built on hearsay and misunderstandings of legal processes." He glanced toward Malcolm without truly looking at him, like a man dismissing an insect. "We sympathize with Mr. Rees's situation, but sympathy does not override the law." Lambert returned to his seat, smug satisfaction etched into every line of his face. Judge Crawley turned to Malcolm. "Mr. Rees, your response?" Malcolm stood, the weight of the room pressing down on his shoulders. He glanced at Nia, sitting near the back, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Then he took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Your Honor," Malcolm began, voice steady despite the tremor in his chest, "Mr. Lambert is right about one thing: the law matters, and that's exactly why we're here. Because the bank didn't follow the law. They broke it." He walked to the bench, holding up 2 copies of the same mortgage document. "These are 2 versions of my mother's mortgage agreement," Malcolm explained. "The original from 2015 and the modified version from 2021, which the bank used to justify the foreclosure. Look at the signatures." Judge Crawley took the documents, adjusting his glasses as he studied them. His brows furrowed slightly, but he said nothing. "Notice how the signature on the 2021 document is shakier, inconsistent with my mother's usual handwriting," Malcolm continued. "That's because she didn't sign it. She was hospitalized after a stroke when this document was allegedly signed. And the notary who supposedly witnessed it, Ms. Denise Fowler, is here to testify that she never saw my mother sign anything." Denise stood, visibly nervous but determined. Boyd guided her through her testimony, her voice growing steadier as she recounted how a bank representative had handed her the document, claiming the signature had already been completed. "So you notarized a document without witnessing the signature?" Boyd asked. Denise swallowed hard. "Yes, I trusted the bank's representative. I didn't know it was fraudulent until Mr. Rees showed me the foreclosure filing." Lambert shot to his feet. "Objection. This is hearsay and irrelevant to the foreclosure itself." Crawley held up a hand, eyes narrowing. "Overruled. If the mortgage was falsified, the foreclosure has no legal standing. Continue." Boyd nodded and handed Crawley another document. "Your Honor, this is the transfer record showing how the mortgage changed hands multiple times before landing with First Union Bank. Each transfer required an endorsement, a signature from the previous lender." Crawley skimmed the paper, brow furrowing deeper. "Now look at the final transfer," Boyd said, voice sharp. "No signature, no endorsement. That means First Union Bank never legally owned the loan they used to foreclose." The courtroom murmured. Even the reporters sat up straighter, fingers flying over keyboards. Lambert's jaw clenched. He leaned toward Klein, who was furiously typing on his phone. Something was unraveling, and they knew it. Judge Crawley rubbed his temple, clearly frustrated. "Mr. Lambert, does the bank have an explanation for this?" "Missing endorsement." Lambert stood, his confidence cracking. "Your Honor, mortgage transfers often occur electronically, and sometimes physical endorsements are delayed. It doesn't change the validity of the debt itself, but it changes the bank's standing to foreclose," Boyd countered. "Without a valid transfer, First Union had no right to initiate foreclosure proceedings. The entire process was built on fraudulent documentation." Crawley exhaled slowly, fingers drumming against the bench. He hated being forced into a corner, especially one with reporters watching his every move. "Mr. Lambert," Crawley said, voice tight. "Can you produce the original, signed documents and the missing endorsement?" Lambert hesitated, just a beat too long. "We'll need time to retrieve those documents, Your Honor." Boyd didn't miss a beat. "They've had months. The truth is, they can't produce them because they don't exist." Silence hung in the room. Heavy and electric, Judge Crawley leaned back in his chair, eyes flicking between Malcolm, Boyd, and Lambert. The judge who had once laughed at Malcolm now looked tired. Cornered. "The court will take a short recess," Crawley announced, banging the gavel. "We'll reconvene in 20 minutes. As the courtroom emptied, Malcolm leaned toward Boyd. "He's stalling." Boyd nodded grimly. "Lambert's buying time, probably calling someone higher up the chain. They're deciding whether to settle quietly or fight to the bitter end." Near the back of the room, Naya stood and hurried over. "You're winning," she whispered, gripping Malcolm's arm. "But they look desperate. That makes them dangerous." Malcolm nodded, exhaustion weighing down his limbs. He'd come too far to back down now. 20 minutes stretched to 30, then 40. When the court finally reconvened, Judge Crawley's face was tight with controlled anger. "Mr. Lambert," Crawley said coldly, "does the bank have the requested documents?" Lambert stood, smoothing his tie. "Your Honor, we've encountered unexpected delays in retrieving the original paperwork. However, we maintain that the foreclosure was lawful and urge the court to dismiss Mr. Reese's claims as frivolous." Crawley's jaw tightened. He glanced at the reporters, at the restless gallery, at Malcolm standing tall despite everything the system had thrown at him. "The court finds sufficient grounds to question the validity of the foreclosure," Crawley announced, banging his gavel. "The stay of foreclosure remains in place. The bank is ordered to produce all original documents within 7 days for further review. Failure to comply will result in dismissal of the foreclosure claim." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Malcolm exhaled, hands trembling as the weight of the moment settled over him. He hadn't won outright, not yet, but he'd forced the bank to retreat. That was more than anyone had expected, including Judge Crawley. As the crowd dispersed, Lambert brushed past Malcolm, eyes cold and hard. "So I think you're clever, Reese. You've just made enemies you can't imagine." Malcolm didn't flinch. "So have you." Outside the courthouse, Boyd clapped Malcolm on the back. "You bought yourself time. Now we make sure they can't wriggle out of it." But Malcolm knew the fight wasn't over. The bank was wounded, not defeated, and a wounded predator was the most dangerous kind. He'd exposed their fraud in court, but the real battle was just beginning. They wouldn't stop until they crushed him, or until he crushed them. The next move belonged to the bank, and Malcolm would be ready. Malcolm stood outside the courthouse, the chill of the morning biting through his thin jacket. The echoes of the last hearing still rang in his ears. Judge Crawley's reluctant order for the bank to produce original documents within 7 days. It had felt like a victory, but Malcolm knew better. Cornered predators didn't retreat quietly. They lashed out. The first blow landed just 2 days later. Malcolm's phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from the court. Plaintiff has filed an emergency motion to dismiss defendant's claims due to lack of merit. Attached was a lengthy document from Bryce Lambert arguing that Malcolm's fraud accusations were baseless and that the bank had followed standard foreclosure procedures. Lambert claimed that the missing endorsement was a clerical oversight and insisted the foreclosure should proceed without further delay. Malcolm's heart pounded as he scrolled through the filing. This wasn't just a defensive move, it was an attack, a clear attempt to crush him before he could force the bank to reveal the truth. He immediately called Terrence Boyd at the Justice Collective. Boyd's voice was tight with frustration when he answered. "They're trying to outmaneuver us. Lambert knows if they can dismiss your claims before the bank produces the documents, the foreclosure stands. We need to file a counter motion. Fast." Within hours, Boyd's team drafted a response, arguing that the bank's failure to produce the original documents was more than a clerical issue. It was evidence of fraud. They attached Denise Fowler's affidavit, the email chain between Lambert and Klein, and Linda's internal memos showing the bank's pattern of rushing foreclosures in minority neighborhoods. Boyd submitted the counter-motion the same day, requesting an expedited hearing. The court, under pressure from media attention, scheduled it for the following Monday. But the bank wasn't done retaliating. Late Friday night, Malcolm was walking back to the motel after another long day at the EK library when two men stepped out of a black SUV parked near the curb. Both were dressed in dark suits, their expressions cold and professional. "Mr. Reese?" one asked, flashing what looked like a private investigator's badge. Malcolm froze. "Who's asking?" "We need to ask you a few questions regarding allegations of fraudulent filings in your case against First Union Bank." Malcolm's pulse quickened. "Allegations from who?" The second man smiled faintly. "That's confidential. Please come with us, or we'll have to involve law enforcement." Every instinct screamed at Malcolm to run, but he stood his ground. "You got a warrant? A court order? Anything that says I have to go with you?" The first man's jaw tightened. "Don't make this difficult." Malcolm took a step back, raising his phone. "If you touch me, this goes live to my cloud and the Justice Collective. You really want that kind of heat?" The men exchanged a glance. After a tense moment, they turned and walked back to the SUV without another word. The message was clear. "We can reach you anytime, anywhere." Shaken but determined, Malcolm called Boyd the moment he reached the motel. Boyd cursed under his breath. "They're trying to intimidate you into backing down." "That means you're getting close. Stay low, stay safe. I'll make some calls." The weekend dragged by in a haze of anxiety and preparation. Malcolm barely slept, poring over every document he had, rehearsing his arguments until the words blurred together. On Sunday night, he met with Denise Fowler and Linda Ortiz in Boyd's office, going over their testimonies one last time. Linda looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. "You realize if they lose, it's not just about your house anymore," she said quietly. "It'll expose the whole scheme. They'll fight like hell to stop that." Malcolm nodded, determination hardening his features. "Let them fight, I'm not backing down." Monday morning dawned cold and clear. Malcolm arrived at the courthouse early, Boyd at his side. Nia was already there, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing a look of fierce determination. "You've got this," she said, pressing 1 cup into Malcolm's hand. "No matter what happens, you've already done more than anyone expected." "Not enough," Malcolm muttered, sipping the coffee. "Not until the house is safe." Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Lambert sat at the plaintiff's table, cool and composed, but his eyes flicked nervously toward the gallery, where several reporters had taken seats. Darren Klein sat behind him, face pale and drawn. Judge Crawley entered, gavel banging sharply. "This court is now in session. We're here to address the plaintiff's motion to dismiss and the defendant's counter-motion." He turned to Lambert. "Mr. Lambert, proceed." Lambert stood, smoothing his tie. "Your Honor, this case has dragged on long enough. Mr. Reese has failed to provide concrete evidence of fraud. The foreclosure was lawful, and any discrepancies in documentation are minor clerical errors, not grounds for dismissal." Crawley nodded, expression unreadable. "Mr. Boyd?" Boyd stood, calm and deliberate. "Your Honor, the plaintiff claims this is a simple clerical issue. But if that's true, why hasn't the bank produced the original endorsed documents? Because they can't. They never had legal standing to foreclose." He gestured toward Denise Fowler. "We have sworn testimony from the notary who allegedly witnessed the mortgage modification. She never saw Mr. Reese's mother sign anything. That's not a clerical error, that's fraud." Crawley's gaze shifted to Denise. "Ms. Fowler, do you stand by your affidavit?" Denise nodded, voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Yes, Your Honor. I was misled by a bank representative. I notarized a signature I never saw." Lambert's mask of calm cracked. He stood abruptly. "Your Honor, the bank was unaware of any notarial issues. This is a desperate attempt to discredit standard foreclosure practices." Malcolm stood. "Desperate? The only thing desperate here is the bank's attempt to cover its tracks. The missing endorsement proves they never legally owned the loan." He walked to the bench, holding up a thick folder. "These are cases from the past 5 years. Families like mine in minority neighborhoods all foreclosed under the same fraudulent practices. This isn't just about my house. It's a pattern of systemic abuse," the gallery murmured, reporters scribbling furiously. Crawley's face darkened. He glanced at Lambert. "Mr. Lambert, can the bank produce the original documents with valid endorsements?" Lambert hesitated. "We're still reviewing our records." Enough, Crawley snapped, slamming his gavel down. The bank has had ample time. This court finds sufficient grounds to deny the plaintiff's motion, to dismiss and continue with discovery. Malcolm's breath caught. He'd won the round. But Crawley wasn't finished. However, the judge continued, if the defendant cannot prove malicious intent beyond procedural errors, this case will not move forward to trial. Mr. Rees, you have 10 days to provide irrefutable evidence of intentional fraud. The gavel banged again. Court adjourned. Malcolm stood frozen as the room emptied. He'd won, but only barely. The bank had failed to dismiss his case, but now the burden was on him to prove intent. Without it, everything he'd fought for would collapse. Boyd clapped a hand on his shoulder. We bought time, but Crawley's covering himself. He's giving the bank one last chance to wriggle out. Malcolm nodded grimly. He knew what came next. The bank would double down. They'd bury him in paperwork, harass witnesses, maybe even fabricate new documents. But Malcolm had come too far to quit. He had 10 days. 10 days to uncover the final piece of evidence that would bring the whole corrupt system crashing down. The trap had closed, but Malcolm wasn't the one caught inside. The bank was, and now he was holding the key. The courthouse steps felt steeper than ever as Malcolm climbed them, his mind racing with the weight of what lay ahead. 10 days. That was all Judge Crawley had given him to prove malicious intent behind the foreclosure. Without it, everything, his home, his fight, his months of relentless struggle, would crumble, and the bank knew it. They had spent the past week flooding Boyd's office with paperwork, motions to delay, and even counter-accusations of defamation. Denise had received an anonymous threat on her voicemail, warning her to reconsider her testimony. Linda, who had risked everything to leak those internal memos, found her name suddenly blacklisted from every major firm in the state. It was all happening exactly as Malcolm had expected. But he still had one last move to make. The night before the hearing, Malcolm sat in Boyd's office with a laptop open in front of him. The screen displayed a paused video, grainy security footage, time-stamped from a bank conference room 3 months earlier. A conversation between Darren Klein and a group of executives, and the words caught on the audio sent a shiver down Malcolm's spine. If we delay processing just enough, by the time they realize the signatures don't match, it won't matter. The court will side with us. We just have to keep pushing. It was the final proof, an admission of intent. Linda had managed to retrieve the clip from a former IT employee who had quit the bank in disgust. It was exactly what they needed. The next morning, Malcolm arrived at court with a renewed sense of purpose. Boyd walked beside him, a rare grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Lambert's going to lose his mind when he sees this, Boyd murmured. Inside, the courtroom was more crowded than ever. Reporters lined the back rows, their cameras poised for what had become the biggest foreclosure scandal the city had seen in years. At the plaintiff's table, Bryce Lambert sat stiffly, his usual smugness gone. Klein was there too, his face pale and drawn. They knew something was coming. Judge Crawley entered, banging the gavel. Mr. Rees, this is your final opportunity to provide evidence of intent. Proceed. Malcolm stood holding up a flash drive. Your Honor, I have obtained video evidence from an internal meeting at First Union Bank. In this recording, bank officials discuss a deliberate strategy to push through fraudulent foreclosures before homeowners can challenge them in court. Lambert shot up from his seat. Objection. This evidence was obtained illegally and should be inadmissible. Boyd didn't even blink. Your Honor, the whistleblower who provided this footage has sworn an affidavit confirming its authenticity. The bank cannot claim privacy protection while engaging in fraudulent activity. Crawley sighed, rubbing his temple. Play the footage. The courtroom fell silent as the screen flickered to life. The grainy footage played, Klein's voice filling the room with damning clarity. If we delay processing just enough, by the time they realize the signatures don't match, it won't matter. The court will side with us. We just have to keep pushing. The words hung in the air like a bombshell. The gallery erupted into whispers, reporters scribbling furiously. Klein's face drained of color. Lambert's fists clenched at his sides. Judge Crawley sat motionless for a moment, then turned to Lambert with an expression of barely concealed disgust. "Mr. Lambert, does your client have an explanation for this?" Lambert cleared his throat, his voice suddenly less certain. "Your Honor, these statements are taken out of context. They're crystal clear," Boyd interrupted. "The bank knowingly pushed fraudulent foreclosures through the system, expecting the courts to rubber stamp them. This wasn't a clerical error, it was a strategy." Crawley exhaled heavily, his fingers tapping against the bench. He looked toward Malcolm, and for the first time there was something in his expression Malcolm hadn't seen before: respect. "This court finds sufficient evidence to support claims of malicious foreclosure fraud," Crawley declared, his voice sharp. "The foreclosure of Mr. Reese's home is officially nullified." A wave of relief crashed over Malcolm. He closed his eyes for a brief second, letting the weight of it settle. He had done it. He had won, but Judge Crawley wasn't finished. "This court also orders an immediate independent investigation into First Union Bank's foreclosure practices," he continued. "Furthermore, I am referring this case to the State Bar Association for potential ethical violations by Mr. Lambert." Lambert's face twisted in shock. Klein, still frozen in his seat, looked as if he might be sick. Crawley banged the gavel. "Court adjourned." Malcolm exhaled slowly as the courtroom exploded into motion. Reporters rushed toward him, cameras flashing. Boyd clapped him on the back, grinning. "You didn't just win your case, Malcolm, you blew the whole thing open." Nia appeared beside him, grabbing his hand. "You did it," she whispered, squeezing tightly. But Malcolm knew it wasn't over. Not yet. The bank wouldn't go down quietly, and people like Lambert didn't accept defeat easily. They had lost today. But Malcolm was ready for whatever came next. The sun hung low in the sky as Malcolm stepped out of the courthouse, the cold air biting at his skin. The murmurs of reporters and onlookers filled the space around him, but the world itself seemed to slow, the noise fading into the background. He'd done it. After months of fighting, sleepless nights, and relentless retaliation, the foreclosure on his mother's house had been officially nullified. Nia reached for his hand, her grip warm and steady. "Malcolm," she whispered, eyes shining with disbelief. "You won." But Malcolm couldn't smile. Not yet. He glanced back at the courthouse doors, half expecting Lambert or Klein to come storming out with another last-minute motion, another legal trick to undo everything. The system had fought so hard to crush him, surely it wouldn't surrender this easily. Boyd joined them on the steps, phone in hand. "I just spoke with the clerk's office," he said, a rare smile breaking across his tired face. "The judge's order has already been filed. It's official. The house is yours." Malcolm exhaled, the tension slowly unraveling from his shoulders. The house. His mother's house. The place she'd fought for, sacrificed for. Safe, at last. But safety came at a cost. Linda Ortiz, standing near the bottom of the steps, caught Malcolm's eye and gave a tired nod. She'd lost her job, her career in corporate law effectively destroyed after blowing the whistle on First Union Bank. Denise Fowler stood beside her, arms crossed tightly, face drawn with exhaustion. The threats against her had stopped, at least for now, but she knew her notary license was hanging by a thread. "This isn't over," Linda said quietly as Malcolm approached. "The bank's going to appeal. They'll fight the investigation. Crawley will do everything he can to cover his tracks." Malcolm nodded. He'd expected as much. The system didn't unravel overnight. It clung to power until the very end, fighting tooth and nail to protect those who benefited from it. But this time they'd underestimated him. "I'm not done either," Malcolm replied, voice firm. "They wanted me to give up, to walk away. But now?" He glanced back at the crowd, at the cameras still flashing. "Now I know how to fight, and I'm not fighting just for me anymore." Later that evening, Malcolm stood on the cracked sidewalk outside the house that had nearly been stolen from him. The eviction notice was gone, replaced by the original deed, freshly stamped by the courthouse. He ran his fingers over his mother's name, tears prickling at the corners of his eyes. Inside, the rooms were empty but full of memories. The worn couch where his mother had watched her favorite soap operas. The kitchen table, scratched from years of family dinners and late-night homework sessions. The faded wallpaper in the hallway, peeling at the corners but stubbornly clinging on, just like him. The fight had taken everything from him: his job, his savings, his peace of mind. But it had given him something greater: purpose. He'd exposed corruption not just for himself, but for countless others who had been quietly crushed by the same system. Families who had lost everything without ever knowing the fight was rigged. From the start, a knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Boyd stood there, holding a thick manila envelope. "Settlement offer," Boyd said, handing it over. "First Union's legal team wants to avoid a full-scale investigation. They're offering a cash payout if you agree to drop the civil claims." Malcolm opened the envelope, eyes widening at the figure inside. 6 figures. Enough to rebuild his life, to start fresh. But as he flipped through the papers, his gaze caught one line buried deep in the fine print. "Acceptance of this settlement constitutes full release of claims against First Union Bank, its subsidiaries and associated parties." A gag order. They weren't just trying to buy him off, they were trying to silence him. Malcolm looked up at Boyd, jaw tightening. "If I sign this, the investigation dies. They get away with it." Boyd nodded slowly. "It's your call, Malcolm. No one would blame you for taking the money and walking away. You've already won." But had he? Winning back his house was personal. But justice, that was bigger than him. If he took the settlement, the bank would continue its predatory practices, just with more caution, more secrecy. Families like his would keep losing their homes, their histories, their lives. Malcolm handed the envelope back. "Tell them to shove it, I'm not for sale." Boyd's smile returned, wider this time. "I figured you'd say that." Over the next few weeks, the fallout was swift and brutal. The video evidence of the bank's foreclosure scheme went viral, picked up by news stations across the country. State investigators raided First Union's regional offices, seizing hard drives and boxes of documents. Darren Klein resigned under pressure, while Bryce Lambert was suspended pending a Bar Association ethics review. Even Judge Crawley found himself under scrutiny, his financial ties to the bank exposed in a separate whistleblower report. But for Malcolm, the real victory came quietly. One evening, as he sat on the porch, sipping coffee from a chipped mug his mother had once favored, a middle-aged black woman approached, her teenage son trailing behind her. "Mr. Reese," she asked, hesitant but hopeful. "I just wanted to say thank you. My sister was about to lose her house. Same bank, same forged documents. Because of your case, they dropped the foreclosure. She's keeping her home." Malcolm smiled, warmth spreading through his chest. "That's why we fight," he said simply. As the sun set behind the house that had once seemed lost forever, Malcolm knew the battle wasn't truly over. The system would regroup, find new ways to exploit the vulnerable. But now, people were watching, questioning, fighting back. And Malcolm Reese, once dismissed as just another victim, was leading the charge, because power didn't belong to those with money, titles, or connections. It belonged to those who refused to back down. And Malcolm, he was just getting started. Malcolm Reese's battle wasn't just about saving a house. It was about exposing a system designed to exploit the powerless. His story revealed harsh truths. Banks don't always play fair. Courts often side with corporations. And the system favors those with money and influence. But it also proves something more powerful. Resilience, knowledge, and community can turn the tide, even against overwhelming odds. One of the biggest lessons from Malcolm's fight is the importance of understanding your rights. The bank counted on him being uninformed, on the legal jargon confusing him into submission. But Malcolm didn't just accept what he was told. He questioned, researched, and dug deeper until he found the cracks in their story. His determination turned what seemed like an inevitable loss into a landmark victory. Another crucial takeaway is the power of solidarity. Malcolm didn't win this fight alone. Linda Ortiz, Denise Fowler, the Justice Collective, and even whistleblowers from inside the bank stood beside him. Corrupt systems thrive when victims feel isolated and powerless. But when people unite, share information, and hold institutions accountable, real change becomes possible. Finally, Malcolm's story reminds us that justice isn't automatic. It's fought for, step by step, often at great personal cost. The system only changes when ordinary people refuse to back down, even when the odds seem insurmountable. Now it's your turn. What do you think? Should Malcolm have accepted the settlement and walked away, or was he right to keep fighting, even at great risk? Comment number 1 if you believe standing up against corruption is always worth it, no matter the cost. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story if you believe more people need to hear about the power of resilience and justice. Thank you for watching, and remember, the fight for justice doesn't end in the courtroom. It continues. Every day in every community. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and never underestimate the power of one determined voice. Take care, and see you in the next story.